and welcome to today's webcast. I'm Dave Orban. I'm Director of Product Marketing here at Superna, and today we're going to be taking a look at some of the challenges of defending against ransomware and securing data from increasingly sophisticated attacks. First, a couple of quick housekeeping notes. We're recording the webinar, and both the recording and the slides will be made available after the event. Due to the number of folks on the call, your mics have been muted, and any questions that you might have should be directed to the Q&A panel. We've got a lot to cover in the next 30 minutes, so if we don't get to your questions during the webinar, rest assured that we'll be happy to reach out to you on an individual basis following today's event. So today we're joined by Superna CEO Alex Hesterberg, our Chief Technology and Strategy Officer Andrew McKay, and by cybersecurity expert Sean Higgins. This will be a 30-minute panel discussion on how Cyberstorage can help close the data protection gap and meet the constantly evolving threat landscape head-on. In this session, we'll be covering why large data repositories are starting to become favorite targets, why traditional data protection methods fail, cyber storage and the need for what we're referring to as offensive security, integrated data protection at the storage layer and the importance of integrating security products in order to share threat information and to accelerate response. And if we get the time, we'll have a little bit of side chat here on how AI and ML can play a role in closing the data protection gap. So in 2023, ransomware continues to dominate. Fortinet says that in just the first half of this year alone, ransomware as a percentage of all cyber attacks is up 13% from the second half of 2022. What's worse is fewer organizations have actually been able to detect them in sufficient time to take evasive action. I think like something like 13% compared to 22% in the prior year. Reaffirming that ransomware is not only becoming more sophisticated, but also more targeted. Not good. And you kind of see it here, the bump. Not much to say about this slide other than the fact that even though all of these companies had ransomware prevention and detection strategies in place, they still showed up on the front pages as ransomware victims. And that should tell you something about the effectiveness of traditional backup and recovery strategies against these increasingly sophisticated attacks. Cybersecurity Ventures, they predict that by 2031, the global cost of ransomware damage is going to exceed $265 billion US. By that time, ransomware is expected to attack a company every 2 seconds. The costs continue to rise, and the level of your risk can even impact your insurance cost and even your actual insurability. I mean, so it's a really serious issue. Large data repositories, especially unstructured data, which is the largest growing section of data right now, means that the storage footprint is expanding. It's becoming more widely dispersed, even siloed. You've got on-prem across multiple regions, you've got across multiple clouds, and of course in hybrid environments. Unstructured data, as we know, it spans all industries and verticals, and part of the challenge is always determining which business processes are most important to your operations, which data sets, data types, applications, databases, and maybe foundational technologies, which of these need to be protected most aggressively. And while every organization has its own systems and data that are critical to its operations, some are obviously going to be more critical than others. So what we're left with is the illusion of security, network and endpoint protection, which is what pretty much everybody has, very easily thwarted. I mean, still, the main point of entry is either through a phishing scheme or through a tainted removable media, a thumb drive. So we have this illusion of security and not much else. You almost have to assume that someone will infiltrate your network at some point if they're not already there. So cyber storage in spite of the fact that most organizations have these backups and snapshots to protect their data and applications, many still wind up in the news as targets of the latest data breach. The increased sophistication and frequency of these cyber attacks requires more than just the passive defense strategies of the past. Gartner basically describes this as offering an active defensive storage systems and their data against cyber attacks through prevention, through early detection, blocking of attacks, and aiding recovery through analytics and storage-specific recovery capabilities for a much more targeted approach to recovery. Gartner has been following this for the past couple of years and recently published their second hype cycle on cyber storage, demonstrating that the market demand for this level of protection is definitely on the rise. So here we have the National Institute of Standards and Technology, their cyber storage tech checklist. It's really all about identifying anomalous activity, detecting based on user behavior, generating security alerts as necessary, protecting with the tracking of compromised data to enable precision recovery, responding by disabling attacker access and terminating replication of compromised data, so you're not, copying bad data into your backups, and then automation of the recovery to make it simpler and quicker. So this brings us to cyber defense at the data layer. So like we said, we already know that, we've got endpoint protection, we've got network protection that is basically coming to be inadequate. Most of these security investments at the network and application layers, spear phishing still is able to defeat that. It remains a predominant entry point for cyber criminals, thwarting many of these security investments, and storage is basically the industry blind spot. So what we're talking about now is how do you address the storage security blind spot by making cyber storage an automated zero trust approach that allows you to monitor and protect and respond and recover your unstructured data. And then secondly, advancing the detection of malicious activity and active participation in the broader cybersecurity response, basically integrating the data layer security with other security protocols to give you a much more comprehensive security posture. So those are the types of things that we're going to be talking about today. We've got a bunch of questions already queued up here for our panelists. So without further ado, let's see what we've got here. Okay, yeah, here's one. How does early threat detection enable faster incident response? So anybody? Bueller?
I'll jump on that one.
Why don't you jump in there, Andrew?
Yeah. Well, detecting something early, more than just the response, you can limit the blast radius. So if you have an ability to stop the attack before it's been going on for minutes or hours, because nowadays data can be encrypted or corrupted in seconds. So finding it early and fast speeds up recovery simply because there's less to recover. So we focus on the speed of detecting a problem, alerting, but of course taking an action, which in our case is disabling the user's access to storage, and that's what halts the attack of the file system or the object store. So that's really the secret, is just impact less data, speed up your restore.
So when you're doing that, I imagine that there's lots of different types of anomalous behavior that can crop up. How do you distinguish or rate a possible incident to be able to determine what type of action you want to take on it?
Yeah, so in the case of ransomware, that's a very distinct pattern. It's not a normal business operation to read your own data and then encrypt it. So that's only one of the behaviors that you want to avoid. There's also like mass delete. There's also data exfiltration, which looks like a giant read. So there's different, threats to your data. Each one has a different response. So in ransomware, you want to stop that behavior right away because you're damaging data. In the case of mass delete, same thing. If you're going to delete terabytes of data, the faster you can stop that, the quicker your restoration of your data. But these are all, I'll call it real-time problems. There's also the attackers that are inside your infrastructure for days doing reconnaissance on your data. So how do you approach that problem statement? And I won't jump into it now, but machine learning is a great way to do that, because you can look for the needle in the haystack, which is a behavior over a long period of time. So it really depends on,
because that's what attackers are going to be in your network for a while. They're going to get a foothold and then look around to find out what is important. I mean, there was a stat a couple of years ago, it was 270 days before an attacker is found, that they're looking around, finding the data. Ransomware is the last thing they do. You know, it's like throwing a grenade after they've stolen all the money, you know? It's...
Yeah, I mean, I look at this is look, there's a huge opportunity here for organizations to close a pretty big gap. And yes, Gartner and I think some of the analysts have defined that gap as this concept of cyber storage, because we've been attacking security and data related security issues from two different sides for the better part of 20, 30 years. You've had your intrusion detection and firewall and antivirus and all that kind of stuff on the security side. You've had your storage and snapshots and backup on the data side, and obviously you can have encryption and production, but the two groups don't normally come together to discuss anything or to workflow unless something's wrong, right? Unless it's all hit the fan, right? And the opportunity that that Andrew, you just kind of highlighted in terms of the sort of the offensive security, the detection across a broader landscape that's at the data layer, combined, Sean, with what you just shared in terms of being able to recognize these patterns or this bad behavior across multiple landscapes, and then being able to not only take action at that layer, but then inform the security teams and workflows, the SIMs, the SOARs, in a way that makes sense for them to digest so that they can take any action that they need to on their side. It's bridging a bit of a chasm, right? I mean, it's taking action around the crown jewels, around the data, is kind of unique if it's not a recovery mechanism, because we're not talking really about a wholesale recovery mechanism. We're talking about not really going off the cliff in the first place, and then engaging the security side of the house in a way that makes sense with the right data, the right information into the right tools and with the right tool chains that they're leveraging today. And that's ultimately when we see that, you see that slide that David showed earlier of all the newspaper clippings, every single one of those companies had multiple data protection solutions and likely multiple arrays creating snapshots, yet there they are. And it's really in that gap in between data and security that most of those exploits have taken place. And that's what we have in front of us now.
Yeah, but just add on to that, Alex, think about a hacker in your environment. They may look at data from different machines in your environment. They could have different access. And what's the common denominator for all their access is the storage. You may be pulling financial data from a accountant's computer. You may be pulling software, whatever their crown jewels are, whether it's the software they've developed or products they've developed from another machine. And that's all happening. And that could look innocuous because it's coming from two different machines. But if the storage in the middle can help you detect that earlier, that's the key point.
With integrations, which is one of our strategies, how can the information that we have help an endpoint protection system make a better decision on what they might be seeing? So if you get an incident that you're responding to on the endpoint protection side, the ability to ask the storage layer, what do you see? What is this user doing? What did they do over the last 24 hours? That's a service or a capability that can be exposed from Cyberstorage. So simply cross-pollinating what the storage domain nodes with the endpoint and the network intrusion detection, if you combine the knowledge of all three of them, the opportunity for advanced detection goes up dramatically. Whereas today, storage is a bit of a silo, and no one's asking the storage layer, hey, what do you see? What is that user doing? Are they deleting? Are they creating data? Why is this user logged in from 10 different machines? That's odd. things like that are all visible from the storage layer, but that's the blind spot that I think is contributing to the ability of an attacker to go unnoticed for days or weeks.
So here's another question here. Ransomware is no longer just about encrypting data and demanding a payout. Most organizations address this by implementing a backup or restore that allows them to easily recover from an attack. But many cyber criminals anticipate this, so they've upped their game by adding a new weapon, which is double extortion. What are some ideas about how to address this type of a threat?
Well, I think I touched on it earlier. One of the functions necessary to identify someone slowly copying data out of your infrastructure is a data loss prevention or a data exfiltration capability. And since the asset in question is storage, again, the storage layer has an opportunity to identify abnormal data copy activity from a host or a user that doesn't normally do that. So baselining what's normal and looking for that anomaly. The storage layer definitely has a role to play in data loss prevention. And I think that's an area we're planning on investing heavily in how we solve that problem or help solve that problem. It's a complex problem to solve. There's many ways to get data out of an organization, but the source of the data is always the storage. That's the one common link again.
And not to say that backups are not a bad solution. They're a great solution.
Yeah.
You know, what people haven't done is they haven't isolated the backups, make it a one-way write as opposed to being on the same network as your storage. You know, part of the issue with backups is how long does it take you to restore? And how long can you be down? I mean, a couple of years back, Garmin was attacked and ransomwared, and they had to pay because they could not restore their data in the time. So they had a hard deadline. Their maps have to be updated a certain number of days, or else they're invalid. And this applies to all non-commercial pilots. So it would have grounded a whole bunch of planes. So they had to go pay the ransomware because they couldn't restore fast enough to meet that deadline to ground a whole bunch of planes.
Now with backup, if the amount of data that's being created every year exceeds all previous years combined, which is the trend we're seeing in structured data, you can no longer back up unstructured data. So now backup isn't even a strategy that's accessible anymore, because the 24 hours that you have, it takes 2 days to back it up, and you're never going to be able to back it up. So that's clearly indicating a new strategy is necessary to protect your data. If you can't back it up, then you need offensive and defensive capabilities to protect it, because the traditional backup methodology will simply break down. And we're seeing that within our customers. 10 petabyte sized customers, they simply can't back it up in a day.
Yeah.
So that points to kind of the question is, how can you, if you're going to identify, you've got a data set and you're noticing anomalous behavior on, I don't know, 20, 100 files, and you're isolating them, that is a first step in allowing you to be much more targeted in your recovery. So instead of recovering the entire the enchilada, you're just recovering a much smaller subset of it. And I think that's what you're leading there too, right, Andrew?
You need to track user activity over a long period of time in order to go back and identify the data that's been touched by the attack, and therefore do precision recovery. Absolutely, that's the only way to address the issue of restoring petabytes down to megabytes or even a gigabyte, is doing it at the file level. And so that's a base requirement of any cyber storage solution. I'd also suggest, early detection. Reconnaissance is that phase where the attackers look for the best data, not any data, the best data to get a payout. And so, enterprises should consider the fact that the attackers are in their network today, now. They just don't know it. And if you assume that, then the idea of deceptive technologies, so putting out fake data, make fake data. The honeypot concept is not new. Publish fake data in your corporation that's easy to find, and see who goes and looks at it. So, reimagining how to secure your data when you can no longer back it up. I think that's the key message. If you can't back it up, now what? What am I going to do to protect my data? And looking at each phase of an attack, and looking at each phase, and looking at what can I do when they're in my network? What can I do once they're doing reconnaissance? What could I do? And if you look at it that way, it's clear that the storage layer needs to evolve to a point where it can protect itself. And today we're dependent on endpoint protection to protect the storage, and that's not been going very well.
Yeah.
How
so
the one thing that's kind of, I think, struck up here, especially even in the last 6 to 12 months, is the realization that just alerting and alarming, but not kind of taking action, that's sort of it's a natural progression. You turn alerting into action, but then there's alerting, then there's action, then there's intelligence. And the intelligence of being able to have control to stop backup, stop replication, not propagate problems, that kind of thing. I know it's been an area of huge investment and focus, for us, and we're seeing it from the customer side as well. But what's the one? How critical is that kind of intelligence to be able to stop things to prevent propagations of problem without human intervention? And then a second question, and maybe it's more of an ML discussion, but where does it go next?
Well, the one thing in a recovery process, everyone says, let's just go to the backups. But the reality is, in most modern enterprises, of a given file, there's many copies of it that aren't actually in the backup. So there's the primary copy, there's snapshotted versions of that same file that are on the primary storage. There's a copy at the DR site, there's a copy in the backup, there might be an offsite copy. So just understanding what copies of data you actually have as a recovery source. There's more than one source to recover data from. And I think that's a challenge, duplicate data. Customers store the same data over and over and over again for various business needs. But that same copies of data can be used for recovery. So if you can track all the versions and copies of data where they live, then you have another weapon in your recovery that doesn't necessarily need to use traditional backups as the main and only source, because the attackers are going after your backup. They're trying to harm the backup servers and repository, knowing if they succeed at that they're getting a higher probability of a payout if your backups are destroyed.
To Alex's earlier point, about automating workflows and whatnot. I mean, that would suggest that integrations with SIMs and SOARs would seem that these types of integrations between industry standard security tools would be critical to being able to automate, workflows, automate threat response, and ultimately increasing the effectiveness of the cyber storage defense. Can you talk about that, Andrew?
Well, the SecOps teams have fairly mature tools to look at dashboards and incidents that flow in all day long. What they don't have is the ability to protect the storage from within their security tools. So what's an example of that? You've got a suspicious machine, you're pretty confident it's been compromised by endpoint protection. It would be nice if you could identify all of the data that user has access to. And once you've identified it, push a playbook button and snapshot the storage. Make a point-in-time immutable copy of that data right within your security tool. Because you know the username, you know the machine's compromised, you just don't know the impact. So the best precaution is protect the data and finish your investigation. So those type of integrations, the storage layer can absolutely automate the snapshotting of your data, giving you a point-in-time immutable copy, and can tell you the risk, meaning does this user have access to 1 SMB share or 100? Knowing the impact potential of that compromise changes the decision you're going to make. So if I know that user has access to the financial data, very different action than if they have access to just their own home directory, for example. that's all API-driven information that can be leveraged in a security tool from the storage security software. We call that, in our case, that's our zero trust API. It can do all of those things.
Is there a scoring mechanism for ranking the seriousness of anomalous behavior? I mean, you know, attack vectors and tactics evolve. What do you do to augment the existing detection and prevention measures? Is there like a library of possible threats, threat vectors and whatnot? I mean, something like I'm thinking of like the MITRE attack heat map, you know, where they kind of update this on a regular basis. I mean, how frequently do you need to update these things in order to stay current? Because they're not staying current. They're always advancing.
Advancing, yeah. Well, the one thing we did years ago when we developed the solution back in 2017 is we tested it against live ransomware. So we went into a closed environment, let live ransomware loose, the real thing. And what we learned from that is that when you access storage, you can read, you can write, you can rename, you can delete. There's only a certain number of things you can do to data. Mm-hmm. When you look at what ransomware is doing, multiple strains of it, the storage layer actually normalizes its behavior. There's only so many ways to damage data. And when you look at the problem that way, you can create a behavioral detection that works across all variants of ransomware, because at the end of the day, they can only read, write, delete, rename, and so on. And so we found that the need to have signature-based detection was not necessary at the storage layer, because you can identify a bad behavior by looking at, I call it the storage verbs, the ways you interact with the data. So unlike, you know, endpoint protection, where it's very signature-based, we are more behavior-based, in which case we don't need to be generating a weekly behavior file, for example. We can look at two different types of ransomware. They're unrelated to each other, and they look the same when you see what they do to the data. And that's another advantage to protecting yourself at the storage layer, is that you're not on the treadmill of, do I have the latest signature? Do I have the latest signature? That's a treadmill you don't need to be on when you're doing behavioral analysis of activity at the storage layer.
Well, the other thing is that you don't have to be your operating system agnostic. You know, when you're looking at endpoint protection, you've got to have it for Windows, you've got to have it for Mac, you've got to have it for Linux. Exactly. And at the storage layer, you know, it's read, write, rename, delete. That's it. And it doesn't matter if it's coming from a Linux system, a Mac OS, or Windows system. It all looks the same to storage.
That's a great point.
What you're doing at that layer that's different, you know, because the protections on a Mac may be different than the protections for the same tool on Windows. But at the storage level, it all looks the same.
Yeah, we actually found that SMB, NFS, you know, HDFS, even S3, they end up reading, writing, deleting, renaming. And so we actually found we could protect an HDFS workload just the same way that we did an SMB workload. And that's a huge advantage to have a behavior that works across all those protocols.
Sean, do you see, just a bit curious from like your lens working with customers, and I have had this come up in a number of conversations, particularly around cybersecurity insurance, getting it and having, or not getting it, or getting some crazy premium. Are you seeing any kind of patterns or themes in customers either being able to, one, obtain cybersecurity insurance, whereas previously they may not have been, or their premiums were out of control, or have you seen any kind of path to premium reduction? And should we be working with, you've had conversations, but should we be working as an industry a little more comprehensively with the cybersecurity insurance underwriters for kind of defining the next layers of protection and mitigation within the frameworks that they're comfortable with, like the NIST and the COVID and all that?
I am seeing that, you know, and it's interesting. It varies greatly from insurance provider to insurance provider, but they're asking more and more things about how you're securing your environment. You know, they're asking, do you have endpoint protection? They're asking, do you have backups? They're asking, do you have an incident response plan? I don't think they've gotten to the level of storage, because I don't think they, you know, because insurance hasn't been providing insurance for cybersecurity for hundreds of years, like it's done for automobiles and things.
Yeah.
So it's still learning, and that may be, may take an educational phase to say, hey, protect the storage. And, they're like, okay, but we got it backed up. They say they're backing it up. They say they've got endpoint protection. So,
yeah, no, I think it's, I think it's probably an evolution thing as well. I'm just wondering how fast and furious it gets. I mean, what we have seen industry to industry, particularly financial services, insurance, healthcare, what 2 years ago was allowed to be underneath a waiver program. Like you could say, like, I don't have it now, but I'll have it next year. So give me a waiver. And like the waivers were going out like left, right, and center. That we've heard overwhelmingly from our customers in the industry is like, oh yeah, no, that doesn't happen anymore. There's no more way. I'm given 30 days, 60 days, 90 days max. The whole like next year waiver thing is done. I didn't know, like, and I feel like maybe there's more of a clamp down there for now while it continues to evolve. And I'm just wondering, is this 6 months from now? Is it a year from now? How fast?
It might be longer because I think insurance moves a little bit slower. Just a thought on that. In dealing with banks, maybe dealing with banks and their audit committees.
Yeah.
Because their audit committees are auditing their third-party vendors. If they start asking those questions and making it mandatory for their third parties,
yep,
that might be a little quicker because banks are a little more, quicker to force people to do adoptions and make changes.
I'm in Europe right now, and at every meeting, they were correlating some of the things that we are doing for them and some of the stuff that we've got coming out to reducing their exposure to DORA. Obviously, there's elements of compliance in like GDPR, but it's taking on that landscape from what you thought might have been a data related, storage related, infrastructure related discussion, and it's quickly pivoting into a compliance borderline security discussion, which is, I think those worlds are just getting smashed together.
Yeah,
but right now all I have is anecdotal.
We're running a little bit over time here, so I've got time for one more question. So many storage vendors are already offering some sort of cyber defense as a part of their offering. Are these bundled solutions? Are they sufficient for most users, or what should they be looking at?
Well, one quick answer is if you like adding capabilities by upgrading your storage array every week or quarter, which most customers don't like doing.
That's actually fun.
It's like a once a year activity, and that just doesn't, if you're going to update your capabilities once a year, that's not a good security best practice. You got to stay current, and staying current means being able to change your capabilities when you need to, not because it's so painful to upgrade or you just schedule it months in advance. So just that one area, you need agility, and typically upgrading storage arrays is not an agile process.
And how many storage vendors do you have? Look at those big companies. How many different storage silos or versions of storage do they have? They could just have 5 different versions of one vendor's storage product, and you've got to upgrade each one individually.
And then you have to go integrate each one individually, and then you have to go maintain integration each one of it individually. And yeah, we've had a couple of customers point that out, that just sounds like a nightmare spaghetti scenario.
Well, I think that's about all the time we have. Like I said, we've already run over about 5 minutes. This has been a terrific discussion. I hope that we can pick it up again sometime. It's just the tip of the iceberg here that we've really covered here. In any case, on behalf of Alex, Andrew, Sean, and myself, thanks so much for spending time with us. We hope you found the presentation to be informative. Rest assured that if we did not get to your question, we'll be happy to reach out to you after the webinar. Our LinkedIn information will appear on, look at that, by magic, on this slide. So if you've got questions or would like to continue the conversation, please feel free to reach out to any of us here. Have a great rest of your day and hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Sean. Take care.
Thanks.